Good evening. I'm Molly Travis. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Newcomb College Institute, and it's great to see you all here. This is a wonderful turnout for Thursday night in New Orleans at Tulane. The Powerhouse Women's Speakers Series raises awareness of women's contributions to society by featuring influential women across professions and disciplines who are role models not only for our students, but for all women. I'm delighted tonight to present two young women who are students here at Tulane and are members of the student organization Women in Science, and they will in turn introduce our speaker. First is Megan Knowlton, a freshman from Atlanta who's majoring in environmental science and whose other love is musical theater. Megan plays on Team Nugget, an intramural flag football team, and plays in a band called the Laurens. And then we have Tori Traeger, who's also a freshman majoring in biology and currently taking a class in marine biology, which she loves, exclamation point. Tori is an expert on corn, which she says comes from being a native of Elkhart, Indiana. So join me in welcoming Megan and Tori. Thank you.
The very name Cousteau conjures up the image of oceanic exploration. Jacques Cousteau, the legendary and innovative explorer and scientist. His son, Jean-Michel, the famous explorer, educator, and film producer. And now, Celine. Celine carries on the legacy of her father and grandfather while taking on even more projects and sharing all of her experiences with audiences around the world. As well as being an explorer below and above the sea, she is the international program coordinator for Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ocean Futures Society, which allows her to travel the world from the Amazon to the Arctic. She promotes the educational program, which is called Ambassadors of the Environment. She worked on a documentary for the Discovery Channel called Mysteries of the Shark Coast, where she aided scientists in conducting research on the numerous shark species of the Great Barrier Reef. Celine stars in the PBS series Jean-Michel Cousteau Ocean Adventures. Some of her expeditions have included studying the elusive beluga whale in Alaska, following the migration of the gray whale, and speaking with native tribes in South America about the local political, social, and environmental issues. She documents her travels with the use of film and photography.
Along with her work in television, Celine is the international spokeswoman for La Prairie Cosmetic Company and the ambassador to the Clean Up the World campaign operating out of Australia. She has worked with organizations such as the University for Peace of the United Nations and the Earth Council's Earth Charter Project. Through her involvement with numerous environmental organizations, Celine has become a crucial leader in the effort to join communities together towards the goal of cleaning and conserving their local environments. She also speaks 3 languages fluently, free dives, has forged her way to the most remote corners of the globe and back, all while thriving in male-dominated fields. Throughout her work and travels, Celine has striven to demonstrate the delicate connections between humans and their environment, emphasizing the importance of preservation of the beautiful and diverse world we all live in.
I'm going to take you guys on the road with me. I'd first like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I know as students you have a lot of work. As parents you have to take care of your kids. As teachers you have classes to prepare. So I want to acknowledge that you're taking the time to come here tonight. And this is actually my first time here in New Orleans. I got a quick drive-through. My 2 guides are sitting in the middle of the audience. And it was just wonderful to even catch a glimpse of this city, though I really hope that I can come back with more time and actually see it not just as a drive-by, but get to spend a little bit of time here and enjoy New Orleans for everything it has to offer, which I'm told I actually have to eat my way through this city. I started tonight. I had my first bite of alligator. It was a little bit of a moral dilemma, but I did it. And I had bread pudding, which I was told I can't leave here until I have it. So I've had my quota tonight. Thank you. I don't like standing behind a podium. I'll just kind of do this. Tonight I just want to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the work that I do and how it is that I actually talk to my audience and use my work to really communicate the work that other people are doing out there. I feel that more than anything, I'm a storyteller or a communicator, a translator of sorts. I work with scientists out in the field, researchers, and sometimes have to have difficult conversations with oil companies, loggers, and such. And what I do really is bring those stories back in the form of photography and film and share it with audiences such as you. I've been working with my father for 6 years now on the PBS series, and am now in the process of creating a production company and a nonprofit arm that will feed back into the topics that I'm filming. And that, for me, is really a progress coming from 6 years of stepping into the productions as a field producer, but also stepping in when the money's already there. So these days, I'm sweating it, and I'm begging, and I'm going to see investors and sponsors, and it is a whole new, humbling learning process, but something that has really given me an increased understanding and respect, really, for people who work in this field. And just hearing the process of a new professor you have here of what it's like to build a new department on geology, understand that this is not unique, that we all have struggles to get to where we want to go, and to be able to teach other people what we think is important. Back behind the computer I go. So as you all can guess, my family has been, I see two people here who can't see me, so how's that? My family has been in ocean exploration for 3 generations. This is the old Calypso crew. My grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, fell in love with the oceans, not necessarily to be a conservationist, but really through his photography and eventually through film. If you squint really hard, you will see my mother and grandmother in that photo. Anybody? I'll walk over. So the little known story behind all of this is that my entire family was involved in these expeditions. My mother was actually an expedition photographer for 13 years, and my grandmother left with Calypso when she would leave the dock, and she wouldn't come home until Calypso came home. The men would fly in and out. My grandfather obviously was the person on camera, and he was the iconic figure people followed through all of the expeditions around the world. And I never get tired of hearing, "I grew up with your grandfather." I hear it in Brazil, I hear it in France, I hear it in Germany, and it really inspires me to continue believing that we can still have heroes, that if somebody like him is still very much alive in the minds of people, that we need to bring our heroes today back up to the forefront and really celebrate them and the work that they're doing now. There's my mom. She's a very petite French woman. Notice she has the biggest bag. That's all of her camera gear, which she has passed on to me. My mom has moved on to another career in her life. She is doing craniosacral therapy, polarity therapy, and prenatal and birth training. And so that pretty black bag is now mine. You can imagine most moms don't actually want to hear that their daughter is going to the middle of the Amazon, might not be thrilled that I'm thinking about going to Sudan to a refugee camp. And when I went and told her I was going to Uganda, she started a Google search on everything Uganda so she could know exactly what I'm doing. These have been the role models in my life. And although they were a lot of the time behind the scenes, in my life and in my home, they were very much in front of the scenes. And though I followed a path very different from what my family had done, I came back to this. I studied psychology in my undergraduate degree, and then I went on to get a master's in international and intercultural management, big nebulous title, from the School of International Training, very small school, and wanted to really help people transition into new cultures through their work, intercultural training. Went to Costa Rica, worked for the United Nations University for Peace, helping them organize an international peace conference. And lo and behold, their nonprofit arm was looking for a French speaker to work as regional director of Africa and the Middle East on a sustainable development program. So I decided to take a little detour from finishing my master's thesis, and I stayed in Costa Rica another 2 years, and decided at some point I actually needed to write my thesis. So I left that job, and my thesis ended up being on youth empowerment through community projects. So if you can follow that path, there is no straight line. And I was just explaining this to a group that I was meeting with today, a group of young women here at the college, that sometimes you go through these different phases and you don't know what they're for until you can turn around and look at them. And I've really come back to the roots. It's almost like I shot up the tree, I went off on all these branches, and I really came back to the roots of what my family has done for generations now. So nature versus nurture, much longer discussion that we might not want to have. But my parents really have been influential in what I do. And although I don't have a degree in marine science or oceanography, I feel that I can really enable the scientists who are out there doing work in the oceans and the ecologists who are working in the forests to really get their message out through my ability to create films and my ability to talk to audiences. Now, growing up in this family with this family name comes with a lot of perks. One is I get to call my dad up and say, hey, you have an expedition, can I go? But another one is a huge responsibility that I've decided to take on, and that is to continue this work. And really to take that on, not just for my own work, but to be able to highlight the work that other nonprofit organizations are doing out in the world and aren't necessarily getting attention for. One of the places I spent a lot of time in is the Amazon. In the early 80s, my grandfather and I got on a plane and flew down to Iquitos in Peru, and we got aboard Calypso. Of course, my grandmother was already there because she left Manhattan on Calypso. And my mom was with a land team somewhere in the middle of the Amazon. My brother and father were on a raft somewhere up a tributary. And that was really my first initiation to what life on expedition was like. Now, in those days, we didn't have cell phones and satellite, and we didn't have internet in the middle of the jungle, so going on expedition wasn't as easy, perhaps, as it is now, and bringing a young child, I was 9, was definitely a little bit risky. But that's what my family did, and that was really my first eye-opener of how other people lived. I didn't necessarily get to go to Prague to see. I went into the middle of the jungle to see. And what it really instilled in me is an understanding that cultures, traditional cultures and indigenous cultures, still live out there very much in connection with the natural world and with their environment. And that's something that I keep wanting to bring back, those kinds of stories. So when somebody says, do you want to go to the Amazon, I say yes. And when I'm on the plane, I ask why. I always go back. Outside of Iquitos is the slum area of Belén. And Belén's houses, a lot of them are on stilts or they're on these floating logs. And as the Amazon River rises, so do the logs. As it goes down, so do the houses. Unfortunately, in this area, there is no drainage system, there is no refuse disposal, there's very little access to water. So anything that you have to throw out, you throw out your window and you wait till the water rises. This little girl, it's a little hard to tell from this photograph, but this canoe is probably about 10 feet long, and she's rowing that thing all by herself. There's a lot of independence that happens. You know, I think in Western society, we really coddle our children up until they're ready to go to college at 18. At a much younger age, they have to function. And they really can't take on more than what they have because, for example, if their child is sick, that child can't contribute. This little girl was going off to maybe grocery shop for her mother. But she also understands how to navigate that area. Now, the same waters that rise and fall below these waters, below the houses, are also where the children play. So you can imagine everything that gets thrown out the window and ends up in these waters is what these kids are swimming in. And what this picture tells you is the kid looks pretty happy. But about 15 feet away was a lot of trash thrown out from these houses. So the connection between these people and their environment is very direct. It's very obvious. And they are surviving in the circumstances they have. What this shows me is that we need to reconnect with our environment and realize that although we don't see the trash we're throwing out, it exists. And the reason we don't see it is because somebody cleans it up after us, because we have a system that does that. I live in New York City. There is just as much trash in the streets in New York as there is in the streets in Rio. But the only difference is we actually pay people to pick it up. So there's a whole education, I think, that we need to go back to realize that whatever it is that we do out in the environment stays in the environment and comes back to us in one form or another. In 2006 and 2007, I actually went back to the Amazon with my father's production team, and we did a film called Return to the Amazon, which was just that, going back to places that my grandfather and my family had visited in the early 80s. And we went back to look at what had happened in the past 25 years. One of the places we went to was a reserve called the Mamirawa Reserve in Brazil, an absolutely fantastic place. If you're thinking about going down to the Amazon, I'd recommend going there. They have wonderful guides. They work with the local community. They've trained and employed the local community to really be able to work with the tourists. And the way they show the tourists their environment is taking them for a walk and teaching them about the forest and teaching them their culture and teaching them their ways. This was a turtle conservation project that a scientist was working with one of the local communities. Now, these communities down there actually eat the river turtles, and they were seeing a big decrease in the river turtle population. And so what they decided to do, realizing what their impact on those river turtles were, is to create a turtle conservation project, and they worked alongside a scientist who helped them put this whole project together. And it was the kids who were responsible for the baby turtles. So what they would do is when the river turtles would come up to lay their eggs in the sand, they would protect the area where the nests were, and there would be somebody from the village on guard 24 hours a day so that poachers wouldn't come in and take the eggs. Once the turtles hatched, they would bring them immediately to the village and keep them for about 3 weeks, during which time it was the children's responsibility to take care of the turtles. So they really developed an understanding of this is a source of our food. If we take too much of it, we need to replenish it. It seems like such a basic concept, but here it's very obvious. In our society, it gets muddled in so many different layers and so much distance. Where does your food come from? You go to the supermarket, some of it's under cellophane, some of it's in, oh, God forbid, that white stuff that floats everywhere. And we lose contact with that, whereas for these people, it's right there. It's right in front of their face. If it's not there for them to fish or catch, it doesn't exist. They don't eat. They don't just go to the supermarket and make bread. It doesn't work that way. So another lesson for me learned there really was this interconnectedness with the environment and what their responsibility was to be able to replenish what they take. These little turtles are 1 hour old. They didn't even have color on their shells yet. They were absolutely precious. The people also that, you'll see there's a big theme over in everything I talk about, and usually it's the Amazon, because for me this is where a lot of the lessons I've learned are and a lot of the connections back to the environment are. This is a fisherman in the same reserve, in the Mamirawa Reserve. There's a fish called the pirarucu. It grows to about 500 pounds, largest freshwater fish. It actually comes to the surface to breathe. It has lungs much like mammals do and is a very inefficient oxygen user. The fishermen of the area actually know how many fish are in a lake from the time they come up to the surface. And when they come up to the surface, like this. By the time you hear that they're coming up to the surface, they're gone. These fishermen are so connected with that species and so connected with their habits that they can look at a lake and they can tell you just by looking at the lake and watching how many fish come up, they can tell you exactly how many fish are in the lake. So scientists went in because these fish were being overfished. And they said, well, we're going to go in and we're going to do our scientific data survey of how many fish are in the lake. Don't know exactly how they did it. I'm sure they wrangled up and counted. And I think there were, what was it, 59.4, did you say, Tyler? They counted the fish, and it turns out the scientists came up with the same number. So the fishermen, who were just doing it by sight, and it basically just took them a day to do it, were coming up with the same answer. Now, where the collaboration came in is the scientists could actually help them figure out what is a sustainable catch. They didn't know. They were catching as much as they needed, not just to feed their families, but to make a living and sell back to Manaus, which is a massive, sprawling city now. So in in that collaboration, they were able to find out what a good system was. How many fish can I catch? There's also a sense of community. This little boy, I don't know, I don't have kids. He looks, what, 3, maybe? Yeah? He was wielding a knife about this big and just cutting the manioc. And I went in there and tried, and everybody was laughing at me because I couldn't cut the manioc. But this whole process really is a community process. The entire family takes part in gathering the manioc, cutting the manioc, soaking it in the canoes, grinding it, cooking it, and then dispersing it to the entire community. It's the basis of our co-op system. They do it naturally. They've always had to do it naturally because it's survival. They also take care of their kids. This is her little brother. She's probably 5, 6. And the mother, who had something else to do, just walked over, plopped the little 2-week-old into her lap and went off, and the little girl knew exactly what to do. Again, it takes a village to raise a child, and here there's really an example of it. As we walk through the jungle, and we're walking with local people, and they're teaching us everything, we came across this vine. I would have never been able to recognize it. It took him quite a while to find it. But this vine provides water. Again, very direct connection with the natural world, very direct connection with the environment. You're thirsty, you drink. It actually tastes kind of earthy. It's really nice. You have to cut the vine really quick on both ends so the water doesn't seep back up into the vine. I'm going to show you a short video, the first one of 3. These are some excerpts from the film Return to the Amazon that we filmed in 2006 and 2007. This is just the music to get you in the mood. So the opening of this is just a little, I'll move out of the way. The opening of this is just a little preview to show you just the different expeditions we work on, the crew we work with. It's not always glorious. What you're seeing here, a lot of loading and unloading, is what we do all the time. I could have used a little more bread pudding in putting that thing together. Why me? I've worked with my brother and my dad for about 6 years now, and I mean, what's great is that we can share the role of being out there as a presenter. And I love logistics and planning, so I take on the role of field producer quite a bit as well. The second time we went into the Amazon, we spent about 10 months there, and actually 5 months on the ground in 3 different trips. And we just worked with, we had 50 different stories to cover, so it was, it was quite the big project. A lot of the stories, again, were revisiting where my family had been in the early 80s. And some of them were news stories. Things happen when you're out in the fields that you realize are more important than what you set out to do, and you have to be open to that. This was the first, and hopefully not last time, I got to swim with an anaconda, which some people think is a little crazy, but I thought it was a very wonderful experience. That's our chief scientist. He's the one that talked me into it. I don't think she was hungry. She kept trying to get away from us. She was probably about 14 feet long and probably as thick as my thigh. And my dad always says, don't touch the animals, but I can't help it. This is a mata-mata turtle. I hadn't known of its existence until I came face to face with it. And these, again, are the turtles from the Turtle Conservation Project, and this is the release of those little guys. Little land turtle that goes, has to get across water to get to another piece of land in the Amazon. They're having a big nose contest, and my dad hates it when I say that. We also came across caiman in the Amazon, and I was saying this to the group I met with earlier, that my dad had a theory that caiman don't bite underwater because they drown. So he sent my brother and I in first to go make sure it was true, and then he came in with us. sort of the quintessential. There's the caiman. Of course, the only shots you'll see are where my dad is. Now, for all of this, we don't just jump in the water or come up to an animal without first talking to the locals, talking to the experts, really having long conversations about what these animals are about and how to approach them and if it's safe or not. Of course, many animal species, and we wouldn't even be able to find these without our local guides. A lot of the animals we came across wasn't just coincidental. We actually had local people who used to hunt these animals for food, and now they're helping production companies actually get them on camera. The expedition also took us to the Andes because the origin of the Amazon is actually in the mountains. And this glacier is the the Calcaya ice cap. That's the Coriolis Glacier coming off of it. The scientists we were working with there estimates that in about a decade it will be gone, which is very alarming because a lot of people downhill from that glacier depend on it for their water, for their agriculture, their animals, and for drinking. One of the iconic animals of the Amazon is the pink dolphin. There's a lot of interesting beliefs of the dolphin. One is that at night it comes up out of the water and dresses as a handsome man all dressed in white with a white hat to hide the blowhole. And he goes and romances the most beautiful girl in the village and then takes her back into the water. So they always say, beware of the man with the white hat. That's the team. And you'll notice there's women on there. I'm not on my own anymore. My father's team, the marine biologist is a woman, our photographer is a woman as well. The rest of the team are men, but that's all right, we can handle it. So after that expedition, I wondered what else I could do. It was nice to be able to go down there and do a film, but how much am I impacting the people that are watching the film? I was doing the field production in Peru because I speak Spanish, and with the indigenous tribes was doing all the negotiations because of my background in intercultural relations. And while I was in the Peruvian Amazon, I was talking to an Achuar indigenous man, and I asked him if we could go into his village. And he said, well, if I let you in my village, what are you doing for me? And I said, well, we're making this big international film, and the world will see what the oil companies are doing to your backyard and the pollution and the destruction in the water. He pats me on the shoulder. He says, that's nice. He goes, listen. He goes, Western doctors come here, and they want to study our plants for their pharmaceuticals, and we let them in our village. And they give us promises that they're going to help us fight this battle and help us get land rights. And they spend weeks in our village, and we teach them our ways. We take them into the forest. We show them the plants. We show them how we combine them, how we cook them, how we take them, when we use them, and for what. And then they go away, and we see nothing. Does anthropologists come into my village, and we let them because they want to study our culture, they want to study our ways, they want to understand our history, and they make us promises. And then they go home, and they write their papers, and we see nothing. So as well-intentioned as you are in making this film and thinking it's going to do anything for us, it's not enough. And I think that was probably the best lesson of my adult life. I was there with the greatest of intentions. I was dreaming and hoping that this film would change the world. And maybe it will, bit by bit. But what guarantee is that to those people in that village? None. Unless they see something coming back directly to them, it's just this big nebulous promise, and I didn't want to be that person. And that was a moment of change in my life where I decided that I was going to use film production to do something more. Film production was going to be and is my main objective, but it gives me an opening and a portal into a life. It gives me a responsibility to do something more. And by having access to these communities, I have a responsibility to bring something back to them. When I went to the Brazilian Amazon on the same trip, we ended up going to an indigenous conference of 6 indigenous tribes. And while we were there, and this is where this photo is from, while we were there, the topic was health. The entire conference was talking about health, environment, economy, and education. And the days we were there, it was just about health. They purposefully organized this conference in this village because it was the most uncomfortable village for the outsiders to come to because the no-see-ums, these little teeth with wings, were so bad that it was just one way they could make people understand the discomfort and the situation they have to live in. And we were there. And actually, if you go to my website, I think somewhere on there's a picture of me completely bitten because I had the bright idea of wearing a t-shirt one day. Not a good, bright idea. I took the notion of what I'd learned in the Peruvian Amazon with the Ashuar, and while I was there and listened to the difficulties they were having with the health situation, was trying to figure out what more I could do. Now, in the interviews with the indigenous chiefs, one of the questions we asked was, how do you live sustainably with nature? Well, in this country, that seems like a pretty normal question. How does your corporation start their sustainability initiatives? The guy gave me a total blank stare. Now, my Portuguese is not that good, but I had a translator. So I started explaining what sustainability meant. And he looked at me sideways. A little bit the same look the other guy gave me, like, He says, well, if we cut a tree, we plant one. And if we go hunting, we only kill the animals we need to feed our children. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm a total fool. I'm asking somebody who's always lived like this what it means to live like this. We, in modern society, have had to invent these terms. We've had to rethink the whole process. We've had to go backwards by using our forwards technology to do something that at the root we always did. These are the people that have that knowledge. These are the people that live this life on a daily basis. So for me, everything just clicked. They're the ones we need to learn from. They have this knowledge. They were willing to share that knowledge with me. And I can bring that knowledge back. But then I went back to say, well, that's nice for my film, but what am I doing for these guys? So I spent a year trying to bring a medical team down to this area because I was told that 80% of this population has hepatitis. And the rate of malaria, as you know, in many South America countries and in Africa is really high. And a year later, I had a team out of the University of New Mexico who was willing to work with me on this project, a faculty who was willing to sponsor this and send medical students down, a nonprofit organization that was willing to donate medical supplies. And then nothing happened. There was nobody on the ground in Brazil to follow this through. The government health organization, supposedly helping the indigenous people, puts a roadblock up to all foreigners coming in and doing the same. At least that was the case in 2008. So after a year of all this, I still have my full-time job. I'm trying to give back to this community. I'm not able to do it. I decided to let it go, which was a painstakingly guilt-ridden decision because it was like giving up. And it wasn't giving up on me, it was giving up on them. A couple of weeks later, I got a random email from somebody who said, we're looking for volunteers to go into the Peruvian Amazon with a medical team. I felt like I was forgiven. And so I decided to join. And I'm not in the medical profession. I've done basic first aid, wilderness first responder, that kind of stuff. But I decided to go with this nonprofit organization and to help them with their mission into the Peruvian Amazon. It wasn't where I wanted to help at first, but it was my way of giving back to people that had given me a lot. They gave me their stories, they gave me their time, they gave me their images, and they trusted me to be able to do something for them. So this is the journey with Amazon Promise. I am a one-woman production team on these kinds of trips. My way of giving back beyond me doing my own productions is to go with these nonprofits and to give them what I can do. And what I can do is I can create videos for them. This was completely out of pocket. I went as a volunteer. I wasn't going to ask to get paid. And I paid my way there as a volunteer. And I begged for favors of a friend who did all the post-production for me for free, and a sound artist who did all of the music for free. And I decided that this was something that could actually work. I could continue doing the productions I do and make my living, and I could make these short one-woman productions going with these nonprofits into these remote areas and create a piece that they can use to fundraise. This was my way of giving back to them. This was my way of saying, this is what I can do in my life, and I'm giving it to you. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but I can create something that you can use to bring in those scientists, to bring in those doctors, to bring in those donations. This is the team we went with, about 3 American doctors. The local doctors, there's 2 of them, were not volunteers. It was just the foreigners that came in as volunteers. We went up to the Rio Pastaza in Peru, up to a remote area near the border with Ecuador, and we set up these clinics in these villages, indigenous villages and mestizo communities. The clinics were very basic. There was not really a whole lot that we could do if it was something much more of a severe case. We would only go when invited into these areas. We wouldn't just go unannounced. Actually, we showed up to one village that had agreed to have us come in. There was a rumor going around that there was a Antichrist stamping kids with 666. Now, we're in the middle of the jungle, and supposedly this person lives and is doing these things in Iquitos. And 3 days after this rumor started in Iquitos, in the middle of nowhere, a village thought we were that person. So when we arrived there, the women and children scattered. And here we are, like, bouncing around with our little medical supplies, thinking we're doing something good. We ended up having to leave our medical supplies there, but we were able to set up a clinic in another village that really needed it. We saw anywhere from 30 to, I think one day we saw about 178 patients. And when clinic was done and we packed up our stuff, this is the kind of scene that happened. One of our doctors just brought in little blow bubbles. Well, most kids these days, the bubbles aren't going to do it. They want the internet, they want their video games. These kids spend an hour playing with bubbles. And I just sat there and watched and photographed and videotaped and realizing the simplicity of what joy is, the simplicity of bubbles and a jump rope. I want to go back to those days. I want to be that little girl on the right. I mean, it was just a fantastic moment. This is Ramon. He's a shaman in the Peruvian Amazon, and this was with the medical team as well. He painted all of us, and I asked him, because each pattern has a meaning, and I asked him what he meant, and he just kind of giggled and gave me a hug. And I was like, okay, no, really, what does it mean? And he just kind of laughed. Well, next time I saw him, I went down later with another group of people. Next time I saw him, he's adorning me with necklaces, and actually that thing that he's wearing ended up around my neck on the last trip, and then another necklace and a couple of bracelets, and I walked away going, what? First the paint, now the necklaces. Turns out I might have gotten married. So I brought him cologne. I don't know if that was like a good exchange. I want to show you, it's actually on my website, but I'm going to show you the short video that came out of this project. Again, this is One Woman Productions, and it's me and all my gear hanging off of me, trying to shoot in between cleaning pus-filled wounds and washing lice and doling out medication. So, yeah, it was a labor of love. You can play it. The Amazon really has a hold on me. And the communities out here, the indigenous people, are really the caretakers of the Amazon. So hopefully by taking care of these people, taking care of their health, we're also in the long run taking care of this environment. The Amazon is very difficult to live in. Every day for the people that live in these isolated communities is a struggle just to get food. And they depend on the NGOs, such as Amazon Promise, to come in and give them medical attention.
Health is such an important, huge issue. I mean, it's the most important, you know. Health is the most important. Education is up there, but if you're not healthy, you can't study, you can't educate yourself or be educated if you're not healthy. I was a jungle guide on the rivers in the villages, bringing adventure tourists through. And more I started seeing how people were very sick, and then I wasn't able to help them very much. People would kind of sit around my mosquito net, wait for me to wake up so they could ask me for medicines. And at one point I had to give stitches. It was kind of like, you know, this is kind of getting scary. People were counting on me for their medical care. And I just realized that I was going to have to do something more than just bring tourists through to trade for their artisany and their crafts. So little by little, I was able to get people together, involved, that were interested. You know, we were able to help people very easily with very little at the beginning. That's how it started. So it became a formal nonprofit in the States in 1993.
The next 2 weeks, we will be going from village to village on the Amazon Promise medical mission. And sorting through all the gear, I realized what a big logistical job this kind of mission is.
These communities are far from what we consider civilization. Getting there is, in and of itself, an expedition. Wararai is one of the more remote places that we're going to be.
The last time that Amazon Promise was here was 3 years ago, but they remember Patty very well, and we were very welcomed into the village. The health stations that we set up, we just ask them what their ailments are, and then the doctors do a diagnosis and treatment. A lot of times something for parasites, diarrhea, quite a lot of anemia, so we're doling out a lot of iron and a lot of anti-parasitics. It is a wonderful experience to be out here. It is completely isolated and primitive. They live a really harsh life. I mean, their days are spent hunting and making sure that they have shelter and caring for their young.
An absolutely incredible experience. Very traditional culture, very intense family, community. The kind of experience that I came here for.
Every day is definitely another adventure out there. You know, every day is like a book, a beginning, a middle, and an end.
De ayer, sí. We had a girl who had a splinter in her foot, and she needed to be operated. We improvised a little bench outside as a little operating table. There was a huge audience, and her friend, she was very brave. She was in a lot of pain, but she would not move. She screamed, but she would not move. And she just stood up and looked around. She was very proud of herself, and we were proud of her too.
In the community of Wagramona, we saw a 9-month-old little girl, Rebecca, and when she arrived, she was definitely not getting enough oxygen with 103-degree fever.
103.8. Remember, I was standing there watching, going up, 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 up. It was unbelievable.
With pneumonia and was malnourished. And I think if we hadn't been there in 2 days, she probably would have died. You can just imagine that that's just one case of so many. And that's the reality out here. But it's nice to be a part of this medical team and do something tangible to help the people in this area.
I didn't expect to have such a great, cohesive group of practitioners. I felt like we learned from one another. The American physicians had things to show, the Peruvian physicians, and vice versa. I think that's the strength of Amazon Promise, is the blend of, you know, people from many different backgrounds.
That's such a huge part of this organization, are our volunteers, our dedicated volunteers. Without the volunteers, we can't do anything. And when you see other people that do get involved, that's very inspiring to me. We're getting to a lot more people, seeing a lot more patients, regardless of whether it's getting to one person or 30 people or 300 people. That's what keeps me going, you know, getting to the remote areas where people have no medical care whatsoever. We have the HIV education program that Elena's doing, and really making big differences there. And also providing programs that will help them in training village healthcare workers, which we've been doing little by little. For a small organization, you know, we have very dedicated people that are getting a lot of work done. Yeah, there is a lot more to do. We have plans to build a clinic in the slum area of Belém, which is one of the most destitute areas I've ever seen. You know, I would love to have a constant presence in these areas. We need, you know, we need more donations, we need more resources to be able to get there, and we can do it.
I knew coming here this was going to be an intense experience, and I was right about that. Not just physically, but also emotionally. It's really hard to see a lot of people suffering. We go out there for a day and give them medical attention, but there's still so much more to do. Chronic ailments, and what we're doing is coming in and giving temporary relief. It's a hard emotion to handle, knowing that we're helping, but also knowing that we're just scratching the surface with this kind of project. But to see other people, to see our own human species taking care of our own,
really is rewarding. I was actually invited to join a team in Sudan, and it fell through because increased violence in southern Sudan meant they had to close their medical clinic. But the same organization asked me to come to Uganda, so I'll be in Uganda in 2 weeks, doing much of what I did here, having all my gear hanging off my neck, and working with a sustainable farming co-op. The project there sounds absolutely amazing. I've discovered that this is a way that I can give back. It's a way I can go beyond my own work and work with nonprofits that need an extra lending hand. I'm going to take you for a minute into the oceans. I know that a lot of people obviously associate my name with the oceans, and I don't want to disappoint. The oceans are also a big part of my life, and have worked on quite a few documentaries doing that. One was mentioned earlier, Mysteries of the Shark Coast. I was able to go in Australia on 3 separate trips with a team of scientists, and we were actually catching and tagging sharks. The smaller reef sharks, we were bringing them out of water and inserting tags into their body cavity, and then putting down receivers around the reef so we could better understand where their roaming territory was. And with the larger sharks, like a tiger shark, it's kind of hard to pull up a 9-foot shark out of the water. We would bring them to the back of the boat and actually put on a satellite tag on their dorsal fin. And it was really to better understand where these sharks are roaming, so we can not just protect the shark itself, but protect the area in which they live and make a better case for them. Another place that was mentioned earlier was Hawaii. We were there filming one of 13, now 14, national marine sanctuaries. And oddly enough, when we went to the man on the street and asked, do you know about the marine sanctuaries of North America? One of the answers was, I didn't know there were, that the Marines had sanctuaries. So we have some ways to go, but that gives me more work. The interaction we had in Hawaii, we went there, it's the Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, because there's humpback whales there. They migrate to calve and they migrate to mate there as well. I was with the production team. We had a couple of our camera guys down on rebreathers. Rebreathers scrubs out the CO2 so that you don't make any bubbles and you can stay underwater longer. Anybody wants to know more, we can talk later. And they were with the males that were courting one female. The photographer and I were with a mother and her calf. And the whales are very cognizant that we're there. They're very aware that we are swimming next to them. We don't pose much of a threat. We're about this small. And if they want to get away from us, just 1 or 2 kicks of the fluke and they're gone. And then you see the little divers behind them. It's quite comical to film, actually. Little divers swimming behind humpback whales. Good luck. With the mother and her calf, because she was coming to the surface often, we would actually just, we were on snorkel because the calf had to come up to breathe. So the photographer and I kind of stuck closer to the mother and calf, and then the camera crew went down with the group. Now in the group there was a singer, and he was singing the entire time, and I'm sure you've all heard some form of whale's song. It's what we went to bed with. We would hear it in the hull of our boat, and I have to say that's probably, no offense to my mother, the best lullaby ever. So the next excerpt is a short clip from that called Humpback Ballet, and it really shows just the amazing beauty that these animals are, and really the interaction that we have with them because they allowed us to. We entered their space, and we really did so in a manner that was appropriate according to the scientists, and the whales allowed us to be there. If the sound could be good on this one, it'd be great. It's got beautiful music, and I'll just let you enjoy it, and then I'll come back.